everybody, it's time for NHL Games of the Week, where I look ahead at the upcoming week in the NHL and pick out which games I think are going to be the best, biggest, and most exciting to watch. Now, at this point in the season, coming down to the wire, a lot of teams have already clinched playoff spots. Other teams have been eliminated from playoff contention. For Games of the Week, I am looking at great matchups, mostly looking for playoff races or seeding races within the top of the division, whether it's a fight for first place or a team fighting to get into the playoffs. So, without further ado, before I begin, I would just like to remind you to please hit that subscribe button and thumbs up if you haven't. It helps the video so much and the channel so much and is greatly appreciated. But let's get into our games of the week for this weekend. It is a little bit lighter because so many teams have been eliminated from playoff contention that I'm kind of just focusing on like the big games. So starting today on Sunday the 2nd, there's none because there's only one game in the league this week, and it involves the Detroit Red Wings, who obviously aren't going to the playoffs. It's Tampa versus Detroit, and that's not any sort of game of the week in my opinion. So we'll move on to Monday, May 3rd. I have the Dallas Stars against the Florida Panthers. This is a huge week for the Dallas Stars. They are in a very, very tough playoff race with the Nashville Predators, and they're going to need every point that they can get if they're going to catch Nashville in the standings. So this is a huge week for them against some tough opponents in the Panthers and the Lightning. And that's going to be a huge game for sure on Monday. The Washington Capitals against the New York Rangers. The Rangers are somehow clinging to life in the East Division despite losing their last 2 games to the Islanders. If the Rangers want to have any chance of making the playoffs, they have to beat the Capitals on Monday because Boston is really starting to pull away. So that's going to be a massive game for the Rangers against the Caps. And the Caps, it's also a big game for them because they're fighting with Pittsburgh for first place in the division. So that game has meaning for both of those teams. The Toronto Maple Leafs against the Montreal Canadiens. That's another huge matchup up in the North. Canadiens are trying to lock in that 4th and final playoff spot. Maple Leafs are trying to lock in first place. So that game has meaning for both of those teams. Also, huge natural rivalry between those teams, and it's Leafs Habs. So you know what you're getting there. And finally, for Monday, the Vegas Golden Knights against the Minnesota Wild. This is a huge game in the West as far as playoff seeding is concerned, because Vegas still could be caught by Colorado for first place, and Minnesota could potentially maybe move up to 2nd, and certainly would like to try and stay in at least 3rd and not drop to 4th, which again is unlikely at this point. So 2 teams that are already locked into the playoffs, but should be a really, really good game and big seeding ramifications on the line there. Tuesday the 4th, there's really none that stick out on the schedule for me on that night either, so we are going to go to Wednesday the 5th, where once again now Dallas plays again, this time against the Tampa Bay Lightning. This is again, every single point matters for the Dallas Stars in that that Central Division race, We'll get to the East in a second. So again, similar to the Florida game, that's just a huge matchup in particular for Dallas, who needs to win to stay in the playoff race. Washington and New York in the East Division, they play again, and everything about the first matchup applies to this one, particularly for the Rangers. They are hanging on for dear life. They've got to get every point this week if they're going to catch Boston, and some of those are going to be against a tough team in the Washington Capitals. Vegas and Minnesota play again. Again, everything about the first matchup applies to the second one. It's just a lot of great matchups there in the West. And Vegas and Minnesota is one of them, whereas those teams try and shuffle for playoff seeding. And finally in the North, we have the Winnipeg Jets against the Calgary Flames. This is a big one, as the Flames are trying to somehow keep themselves in playoff contention and try and come in and steal that 4th spot from Montreal, whereas the Jets, who have really been struggling lately, are trying to secure a playoff spot for themselves. They have not been playing well recently, so Winnipeg really could use a win there. and trying to lock themselves into a playoff position. So that's a good game as far as the fight in the North goes. Moving on now to Thursday, May 6th, we have the New York Rangers against the Boston Bruins. Yes, this is a head-to-head matchup. Now, by the time we get to this game, the Rangers may be eliminated, depending on what happens against Washington and what happens with Boston against New Jersey early in the week. However, if the Rangers are not eliminated by the time we get to Thursday, this could be the head-to-head matchups that decide whether Boston gets in or whether the Rangers get in. So, obviously, huge ramifications there, depending on what the situation is heading into that game. Also, just the games where the Rangers and Bruins have played each other this year have been really fun games. And those are two teams that definitely don't like each other. They've played very physical against each other and have been really fun games to watch. The Canadiens and the Leafs play again on Thursday. Obviously, that is a huge one again for all the same reasons as the first matchup in the North. Montreal trying to hold on to that fourth spot with Calgary coming from behind. Canadiens need to pick up some points here against the Leafs. On Friday the 7th, we once again have the Dallas Stars against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Everything I said about the first matchup applies to this one. Dallas needs every single point. Meanwhile, the Lightning are in a pretty tight fight with the Panthers and Hurricanes for seeding at the top of the Central, so those points do mean something for them as well. And the St. Louis Blues against the Vegas Golden Knights. So Vegas goes from playing 2 games against Minnesota to then having to play against St. Louis in what also is going to be a really tough matchup and have significant impact on the seeding in the West Division. And St. Louis maybe could be locked into a playoff spot by then. If not, they will be looking to lock themselves into a playoff spot against Vegas in these games. And then finally, that brings us to Saturday, May 8th, which is a pretty big day in the NHL. It could be if some of these races aren't decided before then. But we once again have the New York Rangers against the Boston Bruins. Everything about the first matchup, although it could be decided by then, still applies. But a fun matchup there. Tampa Bay plays Florida, and that is a big game for those two teams as far as seeding goes in the Central, as they are right on top of each other in the standings. Montreal plays Toronto again, so a huge week for the Canadiens against the Leafs, trying to secure that 4th playoff spot, and a huge week for the Leafs, trying to lock in that number 1 seed. St. Louis plays Vegas again, just like the night before. That's a back-to-back set. Really good matchup there in the West. You'll have a big fight there for playoff seeding if St. Louis isn't already locked in. Or if St. Louis is already locked in. If they're not, then they'll obviously be trying to lock in a playoff spot. But I think that by then they'll probably have that 4th spot secured. And finally, the Carolina Hurricanes against the Nashville Predators. This is a tough game for Nashville, who is in that fight with Dallas for the 4th spot in the Central. Obviously, Dallas has a big week this week. Nashville has some easier games early in the week against Columbus that I obviously did not include on here because, well, Columbus. But then they play Carolina to end the season, and this is the first of 2 games against the Canes to end the year. That's a big one for the Preds. If they're not already locked into a playoff spot, they're going to need to win a tough game to lock themselves in. So, obviously, kind of a lighter week this week just because I was focusing heavily on the playoff races that are still going on. And there weren't that many games that just jumped off the screen at me as far as being spectacular. But the ones that have a lot of meaning as far as the standings go. So those are my games of the week for this week in the NHL. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon merchandise store, donation link, and channel memberships are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.